All right, then, thank you so much for joining us, and apologies for starting a little bit behind schedule. Now, these are the top stories we are tracking for you this Friday afternoon. Nigeria, India to boost trade, industrial, and technology partnership. PENCOM calls on states to implement pension reforms, protect retirees. Crude oil prices rise amid renewed U.S.-Iran tensions. Well, let's jump into our conversations today. Our first conversation already, we are behind schedule now. The Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Oyedele, has expressed his commitment to deepen ongoing economic reforms and translate them into tangible benefits for all Nigerians. The minister disclosed his commitment in a statement posted on his X account, noting that the ministry would consolidate economic gains to stabilize the Nigerian economy under his leadership. Mr. Oyedele assumed the position after serving as Minister of State for Finance at the ministry for a short period. The finance minister stated that his strategic priorities includes productivity and growing fiscal discipline and sustainability, revenue optimization, and fair taxation. The coordinating minister of the economy added that the finance ministry under his leadership will prioritize stronger government coordination and public-private partnership. Mr. Oyedele said the ministry will move beyond design and ensure execution while maintaining disciplined implementation, accountability, and measurable results. My guest to start the show today is Mr. Peter Adebayo. He's a chartered accountant, lead consultant, and CEO of 2612 Professional Consulting Services Limited. Thank you so much. It's good to have you in the studio, Mr. Adebayo. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you once again, Tolu, for having me. I appreciate the privilege once again.
Thank you so much. Well, let's get in very quickly. I know Taiwo is your friend, and you know, it was good news. All of us took it as a good news, you know, having him become the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. But let's start this conversation with, what do you make of this appointment, considering his pedigree, all that is antecedents, what he's done before now? Let's start that way.
Well, once again, Tolu, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very exciting to discuss Taiwo's appointment. You know, he was appointed on the 21st of April, 2026, as a new Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, you know, replacing Mr. Oyedele, after a minor cabinet reshuffle by the president, you know, as he deemed it fit then. In terms of pedigree, of course, we all know Taiwo. Taiwo Oyedele is an accomplished professional, you know, accountant. He's a renowned tax expert. He's an economist, wearing so many caps. Taiwo is a fiscal policy architect. Many of us will see him as a fiscal policy icon. I mean, particularly myself. He's known for his expertise in tax reform. As the former chairman of Presidential Tax Fiscal Reform and Committee, that makes him the driver, you know, of the ongoing Nigeria's tax reform agenda. He's widely known as a data-driven technocrat. So with strong reputation in fiscal policy cycles, Taiwo is well positioned. In my opinion, I think his appointment is, in consequence, portends, you know, positive for Nigeria. Nigeria is moving from mere, what I call mere reform announcement to real reform execution. And Taiwo Oyedele represents what I call a technocratic push towards fiscal discipline, towards tax reform, towards investment-led growth. And of course, his appointment, as far as I'm concerned, also signals a stronger focus on fiscal discipline, on tax efficiency, on policy continuity, a shift from stabilization, you mentioned that while you were talking, to measurable growth outcomes and, of course, revenue reform. So it's expected to improve coordination between the fiscal and monetary policy of our economy. So investors, you know, like you're aware, they will not just watch, but they will be keenly interested in policy consistency under this new finance leadership. So preference for businesses will always be on policy implementation that will make predictability of business more pronounced than all the policy shocks. So I will tell you that Nigeria economy undoubtedly is going through a transition phase. And of course, expectations from the new finance minister are very high across different quarters. So as we progress, we'll look into key areas of focus.
Indeed. The role of coordinating minister, that role is very key.
Very key.
Because he's going to be in the center of policy alignment, execution, across sectors, from energy to infrastructure to all of it.
Yeah.
He's going to be at the center of this. Now, what do you make of that role? Because it remains very important. It's not just an easy task.
Well, that's a very crucial role, Tolu. And it's a crucial role that will make him focus on quite a number of salient aspects of our economy. And one of the most important areas of focus for the new finance minister must be economic stability. But in terms of economic stability, why focus is on economic stability, that must be with sensitivity to economic pain. You know, it's not enough for you to look at economic stability. You must also be sensitive to the accompanying pains. The reality is that the pursuit of economic stability can be really effectively achieved without some associated pain, you know, economic pains, just like we have witnessed, you know, through removal of a fuel subsidy, the exchange rate unification, pressure on inflation, rising cost of living, you know, our foreign exchange volatility, you know, matters. Also, the debt servicing pressure that we're experiencing. So there is need for what I call productivity-led growth as a way towards stabilizing our economy. So these reforms, even prior to now, they were economically inevitable. But you know what? Execution of the reforms and social cushioning to alleviate the economic pains will remain a critical aspect that the minister also needs to do. Why did I say that? I've said that because pursuit of macro economic stability without cognizance to microeconomic relief, you want to agree with me, will create public frustration. So the Nigerian economy is currently in a transition phase, like I mentioned. Even though the reforms have improved macroeconomic indicators in certain areas, but many Nigerians are yet to feel the impact, particularly at the household level. But I think with Taiwo, you know, being there, with his expertise, with his versatility, with his exposure, with his pedigree, I do not have any doubt that he's well positioned to make a very serious impact.
So are you talking about translating policy ideas to tangible economic relief in an environment where expectations are high and the policy space is, of course, constrained?
Yeah, you know, funny enough, in Nigeria, we have had brilliant policies in the past.
Exactly.
If I take you down to 1986, Tolu, when Nigeria, under the then President Babangida, introduced the structural adjustment program,
I think ahead of that.
If you look back, memory lane, you will agree with me that the structural adjustment program then was a laudable policy. It was aimed at making Nigeria self-sufficient in food production. But you see, no matter how brilliant a set of policies might be, what determines the benefit is actually in efficient and effective implementation of all of these policies. All of these policies, as brilliant as they are expected to deal with some of these areas where there are challenges in the country. I mean, look at inflation. Look at cost of living. Inflation, you agree with me, still remains one of Nigeria's biggest economic threats. Food inflation is hurting household more than what you see as headline inflation. Transportation costs have gone astronomically high. Of course, with the removal of a subsidy, you look at high interest rate. It has impacted, you know, negatively on the growth of small and medium enterprises, as well as manufacturing. So the real test of economic management is not just in the growth of GDP through the policies, which are mere documents, but then it is whether ordinary Nigerians can actually afford food, they can afford transportation, they can afford housing, they can afford education, healthcare, you know, and many more. So these are issues that must be on the burner, you know, that will require serious attention, even in the course of trying to undertake the implementation of all of these policies. So I would want a focus to be on improve the agricultural logistics as part of, impacting on our economy, strengthen food supply chains. There's also need for us to support local production and also reduce our import dependence. You want to agree with me that our dependence on import has continued to be on the rise over the years. And what has brought about this is because we have not paid serious attention to production or, research or development of our economy. So, also targeted social intervention must also be considered as against all these blanket subsidies. So, I would appreciate policy implementation to the extent that it has been effectively implemented to be able to at least achieve the desired objectives against which those policies have been put in place in the first instance. So as we move along, I'll have the pleasure of talking about revenue generation, among others.
Yes, because it's key. If we look at some of the challenges we face at this time, debt service, revenue generation, tax base, and all of that remains a contending issue. And of course, we've seen the new tax laws and all that is going on at the moment. So what would you say also with regards to this and all of the moves made by government to increase revenue, particularly from the non-oil space?
Okay, let me take revenue, then I will take debt. You see, Nigeria as a nation, we don't need necessarily we don't need higher taxes. What we need is broader tax compliance. What we need is better collection efficiency. What we need is economic expansion to boost our revenue generation and tax reform. Let me give you a few facts about Nigerian economy.
Yes, please.
Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio, you will agree with me, has remained on a very low level. I think it's still revolving between maybe 10% and 11% or thereabouts. And I think compared to what happens at the international scene, you want to agree with me that a tax to GDP ratio of between 10 and 11% is still on the very low side. Now, I also want to emphasize that, look, informal sector of our economy remains largely untaxed. And that's one of the areas of focus as far as the new tax laws are concerned. The areas where we ought to have generated ample revenue, informal sector,
yes,
that we have neglected over the period. This is the time for us to pay attention to those areas. Of course, excessive taxation. When Taiwo came on board, he emphasized the fact that, look, Nigeria has been overtaxed. There are the types of taxes that we have in Nigeria will probably number over 100. But I think when he came on board, he mentioned this, that one of the things that we will have to do will be to see how we can narrow down, all these excess taxation so that we can that have been discouraging business growth and development. So the focus should be on simplifying taxes and reducing the leakages predominant. Now, the challenge is not merely how much government collects by way of revenue, but how efficiently and effectively government spends. So a serious advocacy for fiscal prudence, that is actually what Taiwo epitomizes. Now let me talk about debt profile. Our debt profile and borrowing.
It's worrisome.
Absolutely worrisome. This is actually a very important aspect. It's a very important issue. Now, I think according to Debt Management Office, I think on 31st December 2025, our debt profile was put at, I think, about 159.28 trillion, according to Debt Management Office of Nigeria. That was way back at 31st December 2025. And that was, about $112 billion US as at then. And the portion of domestic debt, out of the 159 stood at, I think, 84.85 trillion, which accounted for about 53.3%, leaving 74.4 trillion as external debt, which also accounted for 46.7 trillion. So all of this put together, they include the federal government debt and debts that are owed by the 36 states of the federation, including the federal capital. So for me, borrowing is not a bad idea. I think I've said it here, not once, not twice. The key and very germane issues, they have to do with cost of borrowing. When you are borrowing, you have to appraise the cost of borrowing. When you are borrowing, you must be able to look at the debt servicing burden that is going to engender on governance. When you are borrowing, you must also ask yourself whether loans are funding productive assets, whether they are funding infrastructural investments.
True.
Or the borrowing is tailored towards consumption, expenditure. So Nigerians, we have gotten to a level right now, whether we like it or not, where we have to move from consumption borrowing to what I call productivity borrowing. And that will be able to cater for infrastructural financing, energy, railways, agriculture, industrialization, health matters, education, among others. So debt may become very, very dangerous when economic growth cannot outpace repayment obligations. So those are issues that have to do with our debt management issues as well as our revenue generation drives as a nation.
A lot of work, but now we see the Middle East crisis coming to hit. This wasn't planned for. When at a time where we had decelerating inflation, we also had the Monetary Policy Committee already, looking at the fact that, well, it's getting to a time where we start to reduce rates. And now, here comes the Middle East crisis. Crude oil price is above $100 per barrel, and we know how much we are paying for PMS at the pumps at the moment. All of this, will it not distort some of the positives of these reforms of government?
Quite frankly, it's like you are preempting me because a discussion of this nature would not end without having to touch on our exchange rate, naira stability, as key, reform areas.
Yes.
Well, Forex reforms are expected to improve transparency naturally. And I think some level of progress is being made, with room to long-term sustainability of this recorded progress. Of course, the situation has not been as bad as it used to be, There's a ray of hope, in this sector, even though volatility has created inflationary spillovers. Of course, nevertheless, addressing all of this should be a major focus of the Honorable Minister of Finance. Naturally, when you look at investors, they will not just want, but they also desire a market-reflective rate that has potential to mitigate the risk of their investment. That is natural for investors. So businesses generally, they will always desire stability as against uncertainty. When an economy is characterized by uncertainty, you know what that means. Planning becomes very, very extremely difficult. All right, so when there is uncertainty, planning becomes difficult, not just in the short term, not in the medium term, but also in the long run. So the market can always adjust to can adjust to any exchange rate. But when businesses struggle with, unpredictability within the economy, within the landscape, what happens is planning becomes extremely difficult. Of course, the issue of our oil. When there is a problem at the international scene, naturally, it cascades onto our risk sector. Now, it's part of the challenges that that are before the Minister of Finance, how we're going to be dealing with the issue of oil and non-oil sector.
Yes.
Nigeria's long-term economic survival has depended on so much on oil, but I think the time has come for us now to sit down, and talk about this diversification that we've been clamoring for, over the years. We have to embrace diversification. There are quite a number of areas, sectors in the economy where we can focus. I mentioned agriculture is a gold mine. Technology is there. Manufacturing is there, even though that sector has not required received the desirable level of attention. You see, our manufacturing sector that has so far set back is one of the reasons why we continue to be an import-dependent or import-driven nation. You want to agree with me the role of manufacturing in any organization? When manufacturing is thriving, there is going to be some level of relief in our dependence on foreign issues. So the other issue I need to also mention is the issue of private sector confidence. Economic recovery cannot be government-driven alone. It is not possible. Nigeria needs private sector participation through private capital initiatives. Thank God you mentioned the private participation, private PPP.
Yeah, PPP.
Yes, So Nigeria needs private sector participation through private capital, through private equity. But of course, investor confidence and policy consistency, they remain key ingredients that will stimulate and attract investors' interest. And of course, we need to make more efforts. Efforts must be geared, must be upscaled in areas that include things like ease of doing business. You want to agree with me that ease of doing business is a fundamental aspect of attracting foreign direct investment. So when the economic climate is conducive enough, it stimulates foreign direct investment. So these are some of the issues that I want the Minister of Finance to contend with. Of course, a more liberal access to foreign exchange, is a factor. Power sector reform is also a factor. Recalibration of our security architecture. These are issues that can actually foster confidence, in the minds of those who are coming to Nigeria, to invest. Not just foreign direct investment, including people who are here in Nigeria. I have friends who are abroad. They desire to come and invest in Nigeria, but the issue still remains power sector issue. The issue of security architecture and quite a number of so many other things. So these are issues that are products of economic considerations before the present Minister of Finance.
But like I said again, you know that where we have these projections and we have unforeseen issues, unplanned circumstances, like what is happening, what would you now think would be quick wins? People are talking about interventions at the moment. What do you also think? Mr. Oyedele said it from France, that we are not going back to subsidy. That's him referring to government. I'm just saying what he said, that they are not going back to paying subsidy. That's not what they're going to do, but they will look for a way, of course, to address the fallout of all of this. So moving forward, what will be your outlook, considering all of these seen and unforeseen circumstances?
Well, I would want to advocate that we sit down to look at our revenue generation profile with a view to identifying areas of weaknesses that will require serious address. All right? Nigeria's challenge is more about revenue weakness than the size of our debt. When government revenue is low, that is when you would think of going into debt. So priority should be on expanding our productivity and revenue generation. Now, there are quite a number of things I will suggest that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Oyedele, FCA, should consider as his first line of priorities. One of them is inflation control, right? Another one is exchange rate stability. I've mentioned that. Another one is investor confidence. Another one is implementing policies that will alleviate food security challenges, because those are things that the people, the masses, are interested in. Now, job creation initiatives that are commensurate with our population. God forbid anything happening to Nigeria. There is no country that can take us. Japa, everybody wants to japa. God forbid if any crisis comes in Nigeria today, I don't know any country in Africa or any part of the world that can take 25% of our population. So, which means we should see population more in the area of advantage, than a disadvantage. All right. So it is pertinent to know that citizens will always judge policy by living conditions, right? And that is through implementation of our policies, not by mere policy documents. So I want to address the issue. Some people have asked questions, Mr. Adebayo, don't you think this reform will worsen the hardships on Nigeria? The answer is no.
We have 1 minute.
Yeah, the answer is no. All right. So only poorly designated design taxes can worsen hardship. Now, if we are able to get it right, I want to assure you that we are in for a better time. Nigeria must move from a consumption-centered economy to a production-oriented economy. Economic reform must ultimately improve living standards. Stability is very important, but inclusiveness is also equally important. Nigeria needs policy consistency more than policy experimentation. Inflation must also be objectively addressed because it now appears as the biggest tax on poor households. So the economy cannot grow sustainably if citizens' purchasing power continues to fall and get eroded. So fiscal discipline and social protections are not mutually exclusive. They must be pursued pari passu. Nigeria's demography will remain an advantage for us. So in closing, Nigeria is at a crucial but important transition point, which is inevitable. Now, the success of the new finance minister will not be judged at the end of the day by macroeconomic indicators, but it will be judged by whether ordinary Nigerians begin to experience lower inflation, improved opportunities, stronger purchasing power, renewed confidence, as well as better conditions, for all. So all of this, I believe, the new minister is very conscious of, and with prayer for him, with support, massive support from all Nigerians, I think he stands positioned for remarkable success as his tenure progresses.
Nigeria is a praying country. Mr. Peter Adebayo is a chartered accountant and lead consultant, CEO of 2612 Professional Consulting Services. Thank you so much for coming live to the studio to speak around this very important topic of discourse. We appreciate you and have a great weekend.
Thank you once again, Tolu.
All right.
Enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right.